So that's, before too long.
Wonderful.
Because the funny thing about Ireland, you go to the pub for a good argument, right? So it's got nothing to do with your station in life, meaning like you can be a garbage collector and you can be next to a professor if you can kind of hold your ground in terms of what you're talking
What
about.
you're arguing?
They'll go many rounds, which means that everybody makes sure, whatever their thing is, that they have a good backdrop.
Yes.
And so, it can be very interesting. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Have you been to Ireland?
We just went this
Wonderful.
summer. Yeah.
Yeah, where'd you go?
We went to Dublin and Dingle.
All right.
Yeah. And you went other places, but Conrad and I
You went to
peeled off.
Kilkenny? Yeah, my brother-in-law's from Kilkenny. I'm actually going back next month. I go over and back quite a bit.
Yeah.
Really liked it.
I just met a woman. I did a writing conference in Vermont, and there was an Irish woman in my workshop. She is writing this novel that's very ton of French. That's what they say the name. Yes. Ton of French. Ernie, to the point.
Yeah, all right. You're going back to the point? What do you think to the point? That's not the point.
Over the last week, one of my favorite.
Our second table and then you're basically so I end up being the substitute cover situation, right? Okay, so then you take the cover. And it's so different from and they're talking about how they want to do this right? Okay, so I'm kind of going like, I wonder how this works out, right? Okay, so it's like there's different stages right now. We live in funeral homes, kind of, right? And initially you're kind of like, right?
Wow. Yeah.
But it's just...
They did a big estate sale and then they did a big big cleanup.
Yeah.
But other than that, can't remember if the people that were, I'm trying to remember the names, on the
So we have the West Shea here.
The Killix.
Yeah. I think they still have somebody of their family.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Right.
But my brother-in-law was very smart.
My dogs and nobody cares.
It's great. You are tucked back in, but as you said, in town.
I mean, they've, of course, built up the whole field behind us.
Yeah. When I've driven through or looked at it in big rooms.
Oh, yeah.
There's a brother really waiting.
That's right. Brother. Hey. You're doing well.
That's a good test.
I made it. Yeah.
Good test.
I saw a Indiana plate out there. Your cousin Greg didn't Okay. Yeah, I more remember Greg.
For sure.
Angie, don't hurt yourself.
What are you trying to do?
She's taking that out, and we're going to put this in. Just because when these get cold. You had something to eat?
No, I'm watching the Action.
What's in here that I missed?
The good stuff.
Okay.
Oh, we can take those.
Oh, I didn't get any of that. Oh, okay, I got some of that, so I got to go on to something new. I got some of that.
Okay, I was going to
Yeah, okay.
Want me to hold it?
You know what? I think I'm just going to try and set it there. Thank you, though.
Might even have one. Your kids are having fun. Look at these two. Who's this in the jeep?
All right, I got your little plate here, baby.
Oh, I know. Oh, I haven't even had time to read it yet. That was so that was a fun thing to do.
All right, and I brought more napkins because, I'm going to go get a little more because I didn't have room for the rope of the egg.
He was like the book man. And that's one of the best things for everybody to know is that
Yeah. So, I know, once in a while you liked him. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Should I stand here?
Because everybody's interested.
You know, I just
Okay.
Just a bit.
Okay, sure. I'll just not move too much.
so we can chat how
You can breathe.
just what's taste of community and gratitude. I mean, they're just really
Ah, wonderful. Thank you.
that's kind of what I'm doing here now.
We're invading. You'll see him.
Can I join you? Following you when you
You will do it.
last trip when you did the around the island. Yeah. Wow, it's fun. I need to get a drink on the way back. I could be
I'm going to start.
So when I first got Linda,
Savory plantain.
all excited because she has
Maybe chicken.
a fungi
whose plate is that? Ibby's, okay. My niece Ibby's sitting next to you, and this is my son Zach. This is Linda Sell, the famous Linda Sell.
I know I met you once.
This is my dear friend Sue. And my cousin Chris. You live behind Freeland. Yes.
I still do. Yeah, and Jay lives on
It's like inflamed.
I know, Erica. Taking pictures of Gabby so that she can add her
Like I feel like I'm cured of my. I feel like good about myself. Feel good about being good. But of course, it's just adjustment. Food for all. City. I told her. I keep you on retainer.
This was going to get her first time.
I feel like we were
Come sit down.
I mean, I feel like I'm a dog. There's plenty of.
Okay. The traffic is
I feel like I'm self-assured of like what I want. Took her down like a year. I feel like I am. But I want. I feel like I have very.
Yeah, that's what I
Clear
know.
which I did not have last month. Last when I was in New York, I was like floating around like.
It's time for Fernando stories. I've been really looking forward to this, and so I'm going to be the one to kick it off. And I will start with a story from my very early childhood. Well, I would think I was probably 7 years old. And every summer we would rent a house in North Carolina and go to Caswell Beach. And we'd all run out of the car and we'd run to the beach, and my dad would just run and dive into the ocean, and he would swim and swim and swim so far out that his head was this teeny little dot. And Mom would be on the beach going exactly like she just did, like that. And one day he did this and he didn't come back, and he didn't come back. And Mom was really freaking out. And we watched him for probably almost an hour out there. And he came back and he came running out of the water, and his face was just lit up. And he said, "You'll never believe what happened. I was swimming with dolphins. They were swimming all around me and they were playing with me." And that's how I like to remember my dad, is just so full of life and energy and joy at the natural world. And that was one of my favorite memories of him. Another memory I have of him was my dad would have these periods of passion for certain things, and he'd be really into things like, when he discovered meditation or when he discovered yoga, he'd want to explain it all to us and teach us all and share it all with us. But one of his passions that I don't think he shared with a lot of people, he went through a period where he was really into Greek music, balalaika music. And so that's another vision I have of my dad and my memory of him dancing all by himself to the balalaika music with his arms up in the air. It just really had. So this one, the third story I have is, it has one swear in it. I'm going to change it, but you could just so you know, it was the authentic Nando. He and I and Mom were out at a retreat in Colorado, and I was just along for the ride. Mom and Dad were doing the retreat stuff, and I kind of made friends with the wrangler who was in charge of the horseback riding. Don't choke, Mom. So one day I finally talked this wrangler. He was taking us out on a horseback ride, and all the time we walked. And I said to him, can we just canter just one time? And he's like, yeah, that'll be fine. And Dad happened to be on this ride along with a couple of other folks about his age and a bunch of young girls. And when the guy gave the signal for the horses to run, my horse took the bit in its teeth and just took off running. and I could not control this horse, and it was running. It wasn't cantering. It was a full, flat-out run, and all I could think was like, oh my God, my dad's going to die, because we were headed for this stand of trees, and if the horses hit that trees, anyone who was taller than the horse was going to get, knocked off. And so I stood up and I was seesawing the reins and working really hard to get this horse to stop. And at the very last minute, I managed to turn the horses aside, and we all went off to the side and stopped. And I very quickly was like, where's my dad? Where's my dad? Did he fall off? Where is he? And he came up and he was all excited, and he goes, I was riding along. There were clods of dirt hit me in my face, and the wind was screaming in my ears. And he goes, I felt just like frickin' John Wayne. Okay, those are my Nando stories. And who else did I ask, Steve? Were you one of the lucky volunteers?
Wow, such a gathering of people. I mean, just look around you at, how Fernando has created community. I think that was his gift to us. So I met Fernando I just confirmed this over at the food table, 1992, and my at that time 10-year-old daughter, who's now 42, and my late wife were in Montana seeking shelter from the wettest summer that Montana had had in 111 years. And we'd become tired of drying out our camping gear and having it get wet over and over. And we used a brochure we'd been given at some tourist place to go to some place called Mountain Timbers outside Glacier National Park. And if you were there that week, would you raise your hand slightly? So we land in this lodge completely inhabited by people from Ann Arbor. And while I didn't know any of them, we had mutual friends, and they were there to share books that they had read together. So my introduction to Fernando was coming down the stairs after our first night there, and he's in down dog in the common area doing hatha yoga in Mountain Timbers open space there. So my first view of Fernando Colon was him doing down dog. Being introduced to his family, being introduced to his family of friends, it just went on from there. And over the years, we shared high spots and low spots. For some reason, I was next to him when he keeled over in a sauna and hit his head. For some other reason, I was right below the floor when Lois took a tumble and we had to drive away from the cottage. But in all those circumstances, the thing I always felt about Fernando is that he would get concerned, but he was never truly deeply worried or agitated. I always felt like he had a light about what we were going to be going into. Some of you may know that he liked to save money. I don't know if you ever came across Fernando's desire to save money, but when my late wife Ava was diagnosed with lymphoma, Lois and Fernando extended to us the invitation of a trip to Pierport with them, but it was in the winter. And we drove together, the four of us, and I think we'd made it a little bit north of Lansing before the weather turned more than I wanted to be driving in. And so we found a motel, and I thought we would be room A and Lois and Fernando would be room B. But no. No. And so this is to me the beauty of it. Because Fernando didn't want to spend the money on us having two separate rooms, it was kind of like sophomore year in college. We are now a foursome in this room. And Lois, I don't know if you remember this trip or not, but we stayed up late howling with laughter and just getting to know each other deeper and deeper. And had he not been so frugal, it might never have happened. The other thing I need to check in with is to see whether, I hope I'm not the only one, but Fernando always, not always, but regularly would refer to me as my man. Did any of the rest of you get that appellation, or was it just me? Okay, we have at least one more. All right, back there. Because there were a few years where my neighbor and I would provide firewood for Lois and Fernando. We'd bring a truckload of firewood and drop it off, and Fernando would stack more than I would get stacked in my time there. But as he wrote the check for the firewood, which always felt weird to get a check from Fernando for... Anyway, and the check was always made out to my neighbor, not to me. But he would always, thank you, my man. And I just felt like I'm his man. Yeah? So anyway, beautiful, beautiful human being who I think had the capacity to see people the way they wanted to be seen. And it's such a gift to have that kind of heart. So thank you.
I'm Margie Barrett, and I met Fernando in 1955 at Blackburn College. Fernando had come to Blackburn in September of 1953 from Valley Stream, Long Island. And my late husband, Biff Barrett, came to Blackburn in 1954 from a nearby town and a nearby high school, also on Long Island. So you might say, what are these two guys from Long Island doing at Blackburn College in the middle of the Illinois prairie? Very small school, liberal arts, but in the middle of nowhere. And how did they get here? And why? Well, in the 1950s, if you were not rich and you wanted to go to an liberal arts college, there weren't a lot of choices. There was Berea, there was Park College in near Kansas City, Missouri, and there was Blackburn College just a short way from Springfield, Illinois. And they would advertise, not just in the surrounds, but Blackburn College would find a lot of its students in downtown Chicago and in the New York area. So by the time Lois Crump and Margie Raby arrive at Blackburn College in September of 1955, these two guys are situated there already. Except Fernando wasn't there yet. College started, and few days happened, and suddenly there was all through campus, very small campus, the rumor, Ferd and Jack are back. Ferd and Jack are back. Well, that was Fernando Colon and Jack Greenshields, and they had spent the summer hitchhiking through Europe. And they made quite an impression on the campus, especially because Fernando had picked up a matador's cape, and he came back dressed in his matador's cape to Blackburn College. Big black cape, Lois. So that was very interesting. Lois was immediately attracted. And by the Christmas of 1955, Lois and Fernando were a couple, and I and Biff Barrett were a couple. And Fernando and Biff decided they had gone home for Christmas. They decided they would hitchhike back to Blackburn. If you're poor and you're going to Blackburn College, hitchhiking is not out of the question. It is sort of what you do. But Fernando had the idea that they should start at Times Square New Year's Eve. Well, it turns out Times Square New Year's Eve is not a nice place to be. There are a lot of people who are touching you in parts that you do not want to be touched, and you're squeezed together. So by the time they were out of Times Square, things had not gotten off to a very good start. They were somewhere in the Midwest when they got a ride. Fernando said, I want to go to Springfield. And Biff said, I want to go to St. Louis, which is where I lived. And the first guy who picked them up was going to St. Louis. So instead of Springfield, they ended up in my parents' living room, these two guys from New York who had just hitchhiked. I think my parents thought they had made a mistake sending me to Blackburn College. Anyway, one more story about why there were two births at the Carlinville Hospital in 1958. I was living in Carlinville. I was married, and my husband was working for the college, and I was expecting a baby. And Lois and Fernando were living in East Lansing, Michigan, expecting a baby. So it was quite normal that I would go to Carlinville Hospital to deliver the baby. But it wasn't quite normal to come down from East Lansing, Michigan to deliver a baby in Carlinville, except Lois had used one of her sociology classes to do research on the cheapest place to have a baby. And it turned out Carlinville was it. Fernando was very impressed with the whole thing. And the night of the birth of Kathleen, he borrowed our old 38-something or other car and drove all over campus. Well, it was a very small campus and there weren't many streets. That meant he drove over all the lawns and campus in our old car. And it did come to people's attention that that car had been in places it shouldn't have been. Anyway, it's been a long friendship and one that's been so great.
And I want everyone that has a Nando story to be thinking about it. You're more than welcome after Dick to come up and add to. Doug's probably got quite a few. I was going to say. I have a good bunny one, so I'll save it. One you couldn't tell us.
Hi, my name is Dick Rigdrink. My wife was sitting over here, and I arrived in Ann Arbor in 1977. We joined the church that you visited today for the service. And it took Fernando about a month and a half to find us, because this was a time that Fernando was very interested in pursuing the concept of faith and prayer combined with physical medicine and psychology to improve the recovery rate. And so for 8 years, Sue and I and about 12 other people all participated on the Healing Ministry group. And we figured after that period of time, we probably had that done. So we retired, and they brought in a new group. But that group still continues under a little different name these days. My second story, I wasn't sure where I was going to tell this story. But with all this talk about hitchhiking, I will do that. Because we've heard the humorous side of Fernando, and this one's more serious. When Fernando was 16, and he was obviously a Puerto Rican, He was hitchhiking out of New York, and he wanted to go to Florida. So he was traveling through the deep South. Now, this whole discussion, this whole story came up because we were with a group, Sue and I were with a group that known each other for a lot of years. And we said, question was, what was the most terrifying experience you've ever had as an individual? And Fernando told this story. Hands down, he won. Best I could come up with. I was afraid I was going to fail this class or something like this. Well, Fernando's hitchhiking Mississippi or Alabama, I don't remember. He was picked up for vagrancy in one of those states by a Jim Crow sheriff who scuffed him up, threw him in a car, and took him to jail. He spent 2 nights in a cold, wet jail all by himself. No food, no telephone, no communication to the outside. He said, I was terrified. Imagine a 16-year-old kid going through that. I can't. That whole scenario brings this racial thing into very clear focus for us. And on the 3rd day, sheriff came in and grabbed him by the neck and dragged him out and threw him in his police car, took him out to the city limits, and he said, get out of here and don't come back. So I'm very interested to find out 2 years later he's still hitchhiking. Now, that probably tells you something about Fernando that you can make your own interpretation on that one, okay? The other story, which I have really enjoyed, it's a little lighter than the last one, deals with, what's your name over here? Lois. Lois and Fernando. And one of my favorite stories is, and I thought maybe the previous speaker was going to deal with it, but she didn't, so I will. Ask Lois how she first saw or met Fernando. Now, there's the storyline itself, and then there's the presentation. When Lois tells this story, and the story starts when she was 18 and visiting the college for the first time, and she saw Mr. Cool. Library, right? Wasn't it the library? In the library, yeah. She said, this is the guy I'm going to marry. Okay? Well, when she's telling the story, it's a lot better when I'm telling the story, obviously. She assumes the appearance of an 18-year-old girl. And she starts giggling and carrying on, and all the hand motions, an 18-year-old girl. Fernando's sitting over here, tall, dark, and handsome, not saying a word. And Lois said, Fernando, did I say that right? And Fernando said in his mature, interactive fashion, pretty much. But those of you who have been married for any length of time, the eye contact between these two when they're telling the story is the story. It's not what she saw, it's not what she said, it's what they're saying to each other as they look across into each other's eyes. Tall, dark, and silent, his eyes are sparkling, okay? He is sending a love message across that room that is so thick you could trip over it, okay? What a relationship. Thanks be to God. Any of you have been to McGee Marsh? Okay, McGee migration time? Yeah. McGee Marsh is a national birding site. People from California, Arizona, Florida, rather than us going there, they come here, it's actually in northeast Ohio, to McGee Marsh to see the warblers come in. Well, Lois is a very interested birder. Okay, and she was asking us for a couple of years, could she go to McGee Marsh with Sue and I when we go? We took our sister-in-law birding about 15 years ago. She still has not gone birding with us a second time. So we're a little reluctant because we're sort of boring people when we spend, 40 minutes trying to figure out what that bird is and get pictures of it. I don't understand that attitude, but nevertheless. So we're a little concerned about Lois and Fernando coming. Now, Lois is interested, and Fernando is supportively interested. So McGee Marsh, there's a big boardwalk. So people are walking by and all this kind of stuff. And Sue and Lois are over there, and Sue's pointing out the bird and say, over there, third branch on the right, see it? And see its yellow breast and its red head and all this kind of stuff. Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I don't see it. Yes, I do. Okay, fine, great. Oh, look at that one over there. Fernando's sitting over on this bench. I'm a little worried about Fernando being my sister-in-law, okay, being totally bored. I went over and sat down, flopped down next to him. I said, Fernando, you doing okay? He said, oh, yeah, yeah. I said, what are you doing? He said, just sit here and watch. An Amish couple came, with their family, came walking through. Big broaded hats, big beards, long skirts. It looked like a Norman Rockwell 1920s painting. Behind them is a veteran, either from Vietnam or Afghanistan. He's missing a leg in a wheelchair. Behind that is obviously a farmer, big old bib overalls, you know. And he's saying, how can I go wrong? She's looking at birds, and I'm looking at people. Just imagine the stories that these people have to share. So when you talk about Fernando being a people person, that's the story that comes to our minds. The last story is the one I was brought on, and I was only supposed to talk about it. So I'm probably going to leave immediately after I finish this up. Yeah, Hamilton Beach. You all heard of Hamilton Beach, right? What do they make?
Mixers.
Yeah, what kind of mixers? Oh, phooey, you can't do this. She knows the answer already. They make mixers. They make malted milk mixers. At least they did. My dad got one, and he had it for about 20 years. He passed away. I got it. Okay, it's at least 70 years old. Okay, you plug it in, still works beautifully. So, like my dad, I like making chocolate malts. So our grandkids come, grab it, make chocolate malts. So I make chocolate malts. They're pretty good, I have to say. Well, okay. We'd go to visit Fernando when he was in bed, and I'm wonderful at sports, but I get a little worn out, and Fernando was falling asleep on me because obviously I wasn't doing a very good job. So on one occasion I said, Fernando, you like chocolate malts? What do you say? He said, yeah. What do you know about chocolate malts? And I said, well, I got a machine at home. You want me to bring it? He said, when can you get it here? So the next visit, we brought our chocolate malt mixer and the ice cream and the malt and all that. And so, Fernando, you want a malt? Yes, I want a malt. Chocolate malt? No, I want a vanilla malt. Fernando, I've never made a vanilla malt. I don't think it's going to be very good. You want a chocolate malt? Vanilla malt. Okay. Small, medium, or large? Pause. Extra large. So I made an extra large one. You know, that's the container. I don't know if you remember the metal containers, but that's a drink about like this. So we're talking, and I think record time, 7 minutes. You think? We're hearing. He made it to the bottom. Okay. Thanks, Fernando. I'll take that. Fernando, I got it. You what? You want another one? So that was a typical pattern we'd go through. And each time I'd keep trying for this chocolate malt because I'm really proud of my chocolate malts. I've made 6 so far, vanilla malts. They're all for Fernando. Look what happened to Fernando. So, yeah, every time we went to visit him, we made a vanilla malt for Fernando. And I think maybe that was, Sue, 8 or 9 times, I guess. We'd go in carrying the mixer and the ice cream Lois would have in the freezer for us. Anyway, what a guy. What a family. What a wife. God bless you all.
So as I'm listening about money and people, it made me think that I learned a lot about bus stations in the Philadelphia area from Fernando. So when he came out to the culture conferences, which I spoke about today, he didn't want to fly. He took the bus all night. I'd get a call around midnight. Where are you? Well, I'm here at a transfer point. Nothing's happening. We're waiting for the next bus to come. Wherever they were, cross country coming out. But he wasn't going to spend money on a plane ticket to fly out. So one time it was King of Prussia, another time it was Norristown. Several times it was all the way into Center City, getting the bus schedules, figuring out where he was going to be, meeting him, and picking him up so we could go up there together. So, but you know what? Part of it was people. It wasn't only money, because he liked to be with ordinary people and their stories. And the people who ride the bus, as someone just told me recently about people who ride the train, they can't afford the plane, and they have interesting lives. And so he met all kinds of people and heard all kinds of stories by riding the bus, by being stuck in places overnight, and arriving in Philadelphia all the time, someplace, for me to meet him on whatever the schedule was. So that just came to mind. Thank you.
Immensely grateful for for all he gave, and our life together was rich.
Yeah.
And so maybe he didn't have any money because I didn't.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, what happened while I was inside? Have I missed something?
Your mom's telling stories.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She's making true confessions over here.
That's right.
She checked and made sure you had left before she started.
That's probably wise. Does anybody? Oh, sorry, Mom.
No, you go ahead.
Please
buddy.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just, I had a date. I had possible dates with a lot of guys, and I just came, and I was young. I was very young, and I just thought, you can't hold a candle to this guy.
Yeah.
And so that worked out well for both of us.
Very well.
And your kids.
And our kids.
I think they're grateful too.
What'd you say?
I think they're grateful too that it was down.
Yeah, he was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful man. I just, we bumped into each other. We didn't go looking for each other. So that was.
That's right.
What were you doing on the bus? You weren't looking at your college. Huh? You were on a manhunt, weren't you?
Not on the bus. I may have been looking for a man, but it wasn't anything to do with the bus.
Anybody else? Anybody else have a non-dose story? Here we go.
Well, I was, and Laura and some other people were in the book group with Fernando and Lois for how many ever years it was, 32 or whatever Steve said.
Wow.
And on one occasion, my daughter, who was very pregnant, and then she did have this baby, so then she started bringing the baby to the book group. And when Elena was about 3 or 4, she'd see Fernando sitting in a chair, and she would just go right to him, just sit in his lap, and it looked like she just belonged there. And he just put his arms around her.
Yeah.
And their coloring was so much the same because of her heritage. And I mean, it looked like she could have been one of his kids or grandkids or whatever, but she knew that there was a connection there, and she knew the right place to go. So it was so sweet. It was so sweet. I wish we'd taken a picture of it, but there it is. It's in my head.
We'll remember it.
Yeah.
You know.
But I'll tell one other little funny story, and I already told Lois this one. As you all have heard, Fernando was always trying new things. And one night he came to book group, and he said, "Well, I have a confession to make." And we said, "Okay." And he said, "Well, I saw this thing advertised. It was either in a magazine or on TV or whatever it was." And we said, "Well, tell us about this." He said, "Well, you know, I was starting to gain a little bit of weight around my middle, and I saw this thing where you could buy this belt that you put on, and it would jiggle the weight off." And then we said, "Well, did it work?" He said, "No." He was very disappointed. It hadn't worked. And then the other thing.
He sent he
that's
called
right.
them up and he sent it back.
Yeah, he sent it. Forgot that part of it. That's why we have to book group, so we can
He wanted his money back. He said this did not work. He wanted his money back.
Money, yeah.
I don't know.
But we
All
always
I wanted was him back. I didn't care what he did about
But we always look forward to see and hear what Fernando's latest adventure was.
That's
And
right.
what new thing he would bring
Absolutely.
to tell us about that he had tried.
Yeah, yeah. Always, yeah.
Happy times.
Really.
How about a grandkid story? Any grandkids have a story?
You must have one up your sleeve.
I just have this memory that I keep coming back to about Nando. It's like one of the clearest, most vivid memories that I have of, I don't know what age we were when we we were in Puerto Rico, and we were in these like kind of cool tree houses with Jean and Bill, and there was the spider. At one point there was this spider that we had much drama about the spider, but I remember part of the accommodation was, it was sort of like up in the mountains in Puerto Rico, and there were like frogs chirping and what are they called? Roosters crowing, cock-a-doodle-dooing, like all throughout this whole valley. And I remember one of the things that they offered at the accommodation was like a sunrise yoga class. And Nando kind of approached me. I must have been like 12 years old or something. I don't remember what age I was, but I was quite young, and he was just like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this yoga class, the sunrise yoga class. Would you want to join me?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's weird. That sounds cool. I'll do that." And I just remember it was me and my tiny self and big old Nando in there. And the one instructor, it was like this beautiful, like open pagoda with the jungle right there. And we were just in there with the cock-a-doodle-doing going everywhere, and the fog, and it was just like this beautiful moment. And I just remember being like, wow, Nando's really into this, because at one point the instructor was like, "Okay, now we're gonna sit here cross-legged," and basically she had us like weave our toes like this together. So like put your toes in between each other, and I was just like, how, what? And I looked over, and Nando was just like toes entangled, just like feeling it completely. And I was like, okay, I gotta get with this. Nando's doing it, I gotta do it. And I just really, like, I don't know, I come back to that like a lot over the years, just that memory, because it was so like lush and vibrant, and it was like, I think the only true memory that I have of that whole trip was just being like, Nando's up for everything, and sunrise yoga, yeah. He can get a 12-year-old girl to do sunrise yoga. Pretty convincing. But yeah, he had his toes just like woven, and I was very impressed by that. It was very good.
Yeah.
Well, I have a little
teeny story, not a big deal, but two things about Fernando. I feel so grateful that I was able to see he and Lois in their Pierport environment, because their love for that place was obvious in everything that they've been able to give their kids and grandkids in Pierport is a little slice of heaven. So just seeing him in the little swing chair on the porch, seeing him just swing and, you know, just chat with him there, that was a nice experience I had. But I think it was a couple of years ago, where was the place in Saline, Kathleen and Brecken, I think he was having some tests or procedure. He and Lois were in there together.
Oh, he broke his hip, yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. So Kathleen calls me, she says, oh God, I'm gonna get there soon, but is there any place in Saline that has, you know, ice cream or malt? I said, oh yeah, I know a place. Can you pick up something for my dad? And my mom's just really bummed out about the coffee here. So I went and found Lois a couple cups of really good coffee. And then I went to Mickey's ice cream place, and I said, can you guys make me a malt, a chocolate malt? And they said, oh yeah. So they made me a chocolate malt. I get back, I give Lois the coffee, and I'm looking for Fernando. And I look around the corner, and I have it in my hand. I said, Fernando, would you like a chocolate malt? And he said, and he was so excited. I'd never seen such excitement over a chocolate malt in my life. I should never forget it. And so I know you said he liked vanilla, but I think he turned at some point. He was super excited about chocolate. My little malt story.
Kathleen, you got a story about discovering your family in Puerto Rico?
About discovering my family in Puerto Rico. Well, I went with him on one of his trips where we circumnavigated the island, and he decided I was going to be his translator. And that did not work out so well. What I remember the best about that trip, it was he was in the process of discovering people. So we spent a lot of time in churches looking in dusty records and all of these old Bibles that were just like falling apart. And the thing that just stood out to me, and as a trait I do have realized that I have, is he just wouldn't give up. And he was so persistent, and there was a language barrier which I was no help with at all. And we trudged from church to church, and I think I was about 15 years old, and it was really eye-opening to me. It taught me a lot about my dad, and I was a teenager. I didn't really want to be there doing that, and still I learned. Then the other thing he did on the same trip, we were staying with relatives, and they had some other thing they were doing that day, and we were just kind of hanging around their house, and he said, why don't we go to see a movie? And so I said, yeah, that'll be fun. It'll be in Spanish. That'll be fun. He took me to see The Exorcist. So I was a 15-year-old grown girl, cool as all get out. I made my daddy sleep next to my bed for the whole rest of the day. And he did it on the floor, on a tile floor next to the bed, because I was so scared of that movie. So he was an interesting dad.
Thank you.
Well, anybody else? The kids have put together a slideshow, and then you guys will be, oh, Isabel.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to say that I always remember him reading. And my favorite, reading always, but also whenever I would have a book, and if I didn't have it in my hands, then he would pick it up and read the whole thing. Like, I had this series about mermaids, and it was like not impressive literature by any means, but like this, and I remember just picturing what Nando thought about these silly little mermaids, like doing their life under the sea. And I just think, I don't know, just that he was so curious about wanting to know what all these young people were reading. So.
I have one thing. When I went to meet my biological family, and as he is so interested in people, when I was walking up the long sidewalk to meet all these people, I must have been slowing down because this hand came up behind me and just kept pushing until I finally made it up to them. So he and Lois walked me up there, and when they saw everything was going okay, then they left. So, yeah.
That's very nice. Well, he's quite a guy. I'm sure there's a ton more stories, but the kids put together a slideshow, and before the mosquitoes come out, we should probably get to that. I'd like to do one more thing, if I might, just for my friends that made the food today. I would like to video, hold on just a sec, hold on. You know, like applause for the chefs. Yeah.